Hello, I'm back again, and this time we are talking about Beowulf, which, like I said, is kind of the the first most important work of British English literature. Said not a British person is in it, doesn't take place in Britain, but what makes it British literature is the fact that it was written in Old English, which is the first language that could be considered the English language, which is very, very different than the English we speak, very, very different than Shakespeare's English, but it's still technically English. Now, there's a lot to talk about in Beowulf, and there's no way I'm going to be able to get to all of it, so I'm going to have to try to limit my focus, and I'm going to try to limit it two ways. One, things that I think are interesting and cool about Beowulf, and two, kind of with a focus on that whole mixing of paganism and Christianity. Remember, this is a snapshot of a pagan world turning Christian. Last time I told you about the two schools of thought, one that it was a Germanic story with Christian elements added or pasted onto it, and the other version, the way of thinking about it, Tolkien's version, is that the story came about just the way it is now, that it was written from the beginning with part pagan elements, part Christian elements. So those are the two ways we're going to look at it. The first thing I want to talk about, it was a question in the interactive videos, which I hope you guys, I don't know, enjoyed, but I hope you guys found it useful and along with the video. And it's about the mead hall that Hrothgar built. And I kind of suggested this in the question. Yes, the mead hall was about drinking and partying, but a lot more went on there too. People ate together, they interacted, they swapped stories, they swapped songs, they swapped ideas. And if you wanted to sum that all up in one word, what is the people coming together, exchanging ideas, telling stories, singing songs, interacting with each other? Well, if you wanted to sum that up in one word, you can say that is civilization. So the mead hall stands in or represents civilization. That's what it's all about. At the end of the day, the beginning of civilization is people coming together, eating, drinking, singing songs, swapping ideas, swapping stories. Civilization gets grander and bigger than that, but it has to start somewhere. And again, this is sort of early literature, so the first important thing or interesting thing I think from Beowulf is what that mead hall represents. The mead hall represents civilization. Flipping to the other side, the first monster that Beowulf fights is Grendel. And we're going to spend a minute talking about Grendel because I think he's super, super, super interesting. If the mead hall represents civilization and Grendel attacks the mead hall, and it's more than that, just attacks it. He is this sort of human-ish looking monster, but he's not human. He's covered in hair. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Hanging out on the outskirts of civilization and attacking the mead hall. Well, why does he attack the mead hall? In the video, it says like the noise bothers him, but think about that a little bit more deeply. If the mead hall represents civilization, Grendel's not part of that. Grendel's not welcome. It's like, I don't know if you ever heard this. He's like Rudolph from hell, basically. He's not allowed. He's not allowed to join in the reindeer games, the civilization, and this pisses him off. This angers him. This makes him mad, and he goes through and he attacks the mead hall every night. So if he's not part of civilization, if he's actively against civilization, if he looks sort of ish human but isn't really and hangs out in the woods, you can say that Grendel represents the primitive, the savage, the wild, whatever the opposite of civilization is. And you get characters, figures like that. There are certain, I guess, characters or figures, that's the best way of looking at it, that appear in literature and myth and stories all over the world. And one of those is this human-ish looking creature that's not human, who lives in the woods or on the edges of civilization, usually covered in fur, kind of big. That sound familiar to anybody? In the Pacific Northwest, they call him Bigfoot. In Canada, they call him Sasquatch. In Australia, he has a couple names. He's either called the Yowie or, believe it or not, the Wookiee. Yes, like from Star Wars. In Russia, he's either called the Alma or the Chewbacca. Yes, also from Star Wars. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, by the way. And George Lucas knew what he was talking about. If you go back to the earliest piece of literature we have, the Epic of Gilgamesh from 3000 BC, there's a creature that fits this description. His name is Enkidu. So almost every culture has in its mythology or folklore or its stories a almost human-like creature that lurks on the edge of civilization. And there are two schools of thought why this is. I'll tell you both. You figure out. I'll let you decide. One, that these creatures actually exist, that they're really out there, that they're real, live, living, breathing things. That's school of thought number one. School of thought number two is more symbolic, that these creatures, these almost humanish, edge of civilization creatures, they're so common because humans are aware that deep down, despite civilization, despite our meat halls and our iPods and our iPhones and our video games and our cars and our big cities, despite all that, deep down, we are just animals. We are just glorified animals. And these almost human-ish creatures lurking, skulking at the edges of society are a projection of that. Those are the two schools of thought. I'll let you decide which one you believe. I totally believe they're real, though. All right. Here's the first example of the mixing of paganism and Christianity. And it's actually Grendel himself. If you think back to the story or you think back to the video, you find out that Grendel is the descendant of Cain. And if you don't know who Cain is the Bible's first murderer, the first bad guy. He killed his brother because he was super jealous, which is another connection to Grendel. He's jealous of the meat hall. Perfect example of mixing paganism and Christianity. Grendel is a troll. That's what he's described as, a troll. There have been stories of trolls in Norse, German, folklore, mythology, long before Christianity. Long before Christianity was ever a thing. So a troll is a very pagan monster. You don't need Christianity. You don't need the Bible to have trolls. They have nothing to do with each other. But what the author of Beowulf does is give Grendel a Christian origin story, a Christian backstory. By making him a descendant of Cain, he takes Grendel, this very pagan, very Germanic troll, and sort of attaches him or low-key hooks him on to Christianity by giving him a Christian year zero origin story. That's kind of the first example of the mixing of paganism and Christianity in the story. Next example comes not long after that. You find out why Hrothgar is safe from Grendel, why Hrothgar has never been killed by Grendel. And if you think back, you find out it's because Hrothgar is sitting on a throne protected by God. Well, why is everybody else in the mead hall getting killed by Grendel? Because they are praying for help, but they are praying to pagan gods for help. And the message there, I think, is pretty clear. If you are protected by God, the Christian God, you're going to be fine. Grendel's not going to touch you. But if you're praying to all these old school local pagan gods, you're fair game, and Grendel's going to tear you apart. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about? All right, another example. As I said, I'm trying to focus on the mixing of pagan and Christianity. Why Beowulf even shows up. Why Beowulf even comes to help Hrothgar with his Grendel problem. Well, if you read the text, you get two reasons for why Beowulf shows up. One seems to be a pagan reason, one seems to be a Christian reason. Pagan reason, very simply, glory, honor. The most pagan of reasons you could possibly get. Glory and honor. Remember, pagan cultures were warlike, and your reputation, your name, was built on how good you were in battle, how good you were in combat. What's better than killing a bunch of people in combat? Well, killing a undead troll demon monster was going to ratchet up your reputation pretty darn high. So one reason Beowulf is there, honor and glory. Pagan reason. The other is he kind of owes a debt to Hrothgar. Hrothgar helped out Beowulf's dad back in the day, so he's paying it forward. He's repaying a debt. He's doing the right thing, which I think is a Christian reason, or at least more of a Christian reason than glory and honor. So, just another example of the pagan and the Christian mixing together. Beowulf's two reasons for even fighting Grendel: glory and honor, pagan; doing the right thing, Christian. And then we get into the actual. They talk actually. They this in here again. I'll throw this in there only because they talked about it in the video I had you watch. Remember that guy Unferth who started talking crap to Beowulf about how Beowulf lost a swimming contest to his friend Brecca back in the day? In a pagan culture, if one warrior mouthed off and started talking crap to another warrior, how do you think that was usually handled? Well, it would probably lead to a fight. It would probably lead to combat. It would probably lead to, remember, this is all a culture that's all about glory and honor. And if someone offends your honor, you got to fight it. You got to protect it. Beowulf doesn't do that. But his response, I suppose a Christian response would be to let it go. If you ever heard the phrase, turn the other cheek, that's a very Christian phrase. Beowulf doesn't fight, but his response is somewhere between the pagan, I'm going to kick your, response, and a Christian turning the other cheek response. He stands up for himself, but he uses his words. Like the video said, he said, yeah, I lost the swimming race, but that's because I was fighting sea monsters for 9 days. Then he says, the video didn't get into this, but I'll give you the whole story. Then he says something like, at least you heard of me, Unferth. I have no clue who you are. You don't have any honor, glory, reputation. I've never heard of you in my life. And then Beowulf waits a second, and he says something like, you know what? No, I have heard of you. Are you the Unferth who killed his brother? Which is a crappy thing to do, but also by saying you killed your brother. Remember, Grendel is the descendant of Cain, who kills his brother. So Beowulf gets his shots in at Unferth, but not physical shots. The physical fighting would have been a pagan response, but he doesn't go full Christian and let everything go. He kind of falls in between, which I think is interesting. Then you get the actual fight with Grendel, and it goes, Beowulf rips Grendel's arm off, and he hangs it from a rafter to show. And Grendel runs off, bleeding out. His arm's gone, and he runs off into the swamp. And there's another celebration. There's a pretty big celebration at the mead hall. People are drinking, people are partying. Unferth is in his place now. You get a story buried within a story that we don't really need to get into, or we don't really need to talk about. And things are great for a night or two, until the second monster shows up. And that's Grendel's mom. And this might seem weird, this might seem counterintuitive, but I'm going to throw it out there because I think it's true. Like the video said, this whole story can be boiled down to Beowulf fighting 3 monsters. Monster number 1, Grendel, done. Grendel's mom is actually the scarier monster. And I put this in one of the, I think I put this as one of the interactive video questions. Well, why do you think Grendel's mom is the scarier monster? And it has everything to do with her motivation and how she kills. One, she is a pissed off mother. She is a mother fueled by a mother's rage, which is going to make anybody scary. The second, and I guess people can see that sort of makes sense. The second has everything to do with how and who she kills. Grendel was a volume killer. He killed 30 people at a clip, which is scary. That's a high body count. That's not how Grendel's mom operates. Grendel's mom, when she attacked, didn't go for quantity. She killed for maximum impact. If you go back and actually read, Grendel's mom kills 1 person, but it's the king's advisor or the king's best friend. She knows where to kill to get the maximum hurt. She kills strategically. She uses strategy. She goes for the maximum personal impact damage on the king. Where Grendel goes for sheer volume, Grendel's mom knows just who to target to really, really hurt Hrothgar. And it does. Hrothgar gets all upset and he goes to Beowulf and is like, yo, Beowulf, you remember, the Grendel that you killed, and I appreciate your help with that, but we got another problem. Grendel's mom's coming, messing people up. So Beowulf's like, yeah, all right, I'll go kill Grendel's mom. And like the video said, he goes to like the lake of monsters and he dives deep down, 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 and he fights Grendel's mom at the bottom of the lake. And we haven't talked about the mixing of pagan and Christianity in a minute. The sword Grendel brings down with him is the sword Runting. It's the one that the guy who mouthed off to Beowulf gave him as an apology present. Swords with names, that's a pagan thing. Pagans, because they were so into violence in Warcraft, not the video game Warcraft, but fighting, tended to name their weapons. The most famous one in the history of the world is Excalibur. You got one in Norse culture with the stupid name Barnstock. You have two named swords in Beowulf. This is the first one, Runting. The name sword. Naming a sword is a very pagan thing because warriors felt bonds or connections with their weapons because they used them so often. Grendel takes Runting, the pagan sword, to kill Grendel's mom, and it shattered. It broke. And the message there is hopefully pretty clear. Paganism isn't going to help you. Paganism isn't going to help in this situation. The sword on the wall, remember the video said, it's this mixing of paganism and Christianity. You had a scene from the Bible painted on it, but you also had pagan runes written on it. So it seems sort of like the mixture of pagan and Christianity will help. But I would argue that it's much more in favor of Christianity, because when Beowulf is telling the story, he says something like, God put that sword on the wall, and by the grace of God, I took that sword and I killed Grendel's mom. He mentions nothing about the pagan parts of it, but he says God put it on the wall. It's like if you ever see like a football game or a baseball game, and whoever catches the winning touchdown, like 9 times out of 10, the first things out of their mouth is, I want to thank God for, letting us win. I want to thank God for helping me catch the touchdown. Just one time, this would make me so happy. Just one time, I'd like to see the losing team be interviewed and be like, yeah, no, we totally would have won that game if God didn't make me drop that pass in the end zone. Or interview the quarterback and be like, we would have won, but God made me throw that pick 6 in the fourth quarter. Neither here nor there. That would just make me happy to see that. Point being, Beowulf credits God for putting the sword on the wall that helped him beat Grendel's mom. So I think, the sword has a mixture of pagan and Christian elements on it, but I think it's more in the favor of God, of Christianity. Now we get to one of the most important moments in the poem, and I would argue, and this is a bold statement here, one of the most important moments in Western literature and Western history. Beowulf comes back to the mead hall to Hrothgar and is like, I killed Grendel's mom for you. Here's her head, just to show you I did it, whatever. Hrothgar is thankful, and he starts talking to Beowulf, and he gives Beowulf some advice. And this advice is called The Story of Hermiad the Bad King. It's a story Hrothgar tells Beowulf. And Hrothgar basically goes something like this. Hrothgar's like, Beowulf, you're becoming an awesome hero. You're strong, you're brave, you're powerful. You're becoming a name for yourself, reputation, blah, blah, blah. I need you to be careful, though. Because there was a king, kind of like you, not exactly like you, but kind of like you, named Hermiad. And he started getting really, really, really greedy with all his treasure and his loot and his riches. Don't be greedy. He started thinking who the hell he was, started thinking he was awesome, started thinking he was better than everybody, started being really arrogant, started acting really proud. Don't be too proud. Hermione would get angry all the time. He'd get pissed all the time. He'd fly into rage. Don't be like that, Beowulf. Don't be angry all the time. So to recap, the advice Hrothgar gives Beowulf is, don't be greedy, don't be angry, don't be prideful, don't be proud. Those three things sound familiar to anybody? 3 out of 7 of something? Have you ever heard of the 7 deadly sins? Pride, anger, and greed are 3 of the 7 deadly sins. Hrothgar is giving Beowulf very, very Christian advice. Don't succumb to 3 of the 7 deadly sins. Think about this for a second. In a pagan, warlike culture, would being angry and flying into rage be beneficial? On the battlefield, yeah, absolutely. The whole entire pagan culture was predicated on pride, and you're building your name in battle and building your reputation. Pride was very much a part and parcel of pagan culture. So was greed. To the victor went the spoils, to the best warrior, the best loot and treasure. That's who got it. This moment, this Hermione the Bad King advice is a pivot moment. It's a twisting moment in Western history where you see pagan values starting to give way to Christian values. It's not an overnight thing. It's not an instantaneous thing. It doesn't happen like that. But you see it starting to happen here. And Beowulf's like, yeah, I'll take your advice, blah, blah, blah. Not a bad idea. And he goes. And remember, Beowulf is a visitor in Hrothgar's kingdom. And he goes home. And he could, with his reputation and his name and his honor, just go home and take over the kingdom where he's from. He becomes king eventually, but he does it the right way. He waits for the king to die and then the king's heir to die, and eventually Beowulf becomes king. I think that's sort of a Christian moment because he could have just stormed in there and been like, I killed Grendel, I killed Grendel's mom. What's got 2 thumbs and should rule this kingdom? This guy, he doesn't do that. He waits, he does the right thing. And he eventually becomes king. And he rules for 50 years. Things are good. He's a good king. Nothing bad happens. He's a pretty good king. Until some dude steals a dragon's cup. He goes to this guy. He doesn't do it for bad reasons. He's a slave whose master who has been beating him. He takes the cup to, so he can escape. Dragon gets super, super mad and torches the kingdom. Like as the video said, assuming he eventually killed the guy who stole the cup. This was one of the interactive video questions. What do you think the dragon represents? And eventually, for some reason, dragons get associated with Satan. I don't understand why, but they do. Initially, think about what dragons protect or dragons hoard. Gold and princesses. If you think about it, you play Mario Brothers, Bowser protecting the princess is basically a turtleized dragon, but whatever. Ask yourself this. What the hell is a dragon going to do with gold? It's not like he's going to swing by 7-Eleven and pick up food. It's not like he needs the money. He's collecting it just because. A dragon is going to do even less with a princess. A dragon has even less of a use for a princess. So if you hoard and collect things that you don't need just for the sake of having them, that's greed. Dragons, traditionally, in old school literature and fairy tales, they represent greed. And if the whole idea of a dragon with a weak spot and hoarding the treasure and the cup being stolen, if that sounds familiar, like the video said, yes, it's very, very much The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, like the Tolkien. Like I told you, Tolkien studied this stuff. So Beowulf gets super angry that his house gets burned down, and he's old at this point. Like he's probably like he's ruled 50 years. Let's say he was like 17, 18 when he killed Grendel and Grendel's mom. He's like pushing 70-ish now. But he puts his armor on and he goes out to fight the dragon. If you read the text, depending on how you take it, how you interpret it, either Beowulf had a really strong idea he was going to die because he was 70 going to fight a dragon, or he actually knew he was going to die, but he goes out and does it anyway. If that reminds you of Dream of the Rood, someone proudly going to face their death even though they know they're going to die anyway, yes, that should remind you of that. And he takes 11 guys plus the guy who stole his cup. 11 plus 1 is 12. And a guy who's going to bravely face his death, rolling around with 12 other people. If that sounds familiar, if that sounds like Jesus and his apostles, there's probably a reason for that. That's very much one of the Christian elements in the text. Beowulf goes to fight the dragon. 11 of his guys bounce because it's a dragon who's like insanely big and is killing people. One guy, Wiglaf, Beowulf's relative, sticks around, and Beowulf does eventually kill the dragon, but the dragon bites him and gets some venom in him, and he's done. Like, Beowulf is gonna die. Like, you've got dragon poison in you. It's not something you come back from. We're gonna take a minute to look at Beowulf's dying thoughts. And they talk about, and if you look at the reason we're like actually locking in on these is because we're wrapping up this talk about Beowulf, and I want to wrap up on the whole pagan Christian balance. And let's look, these are Beowulf's last thoughts on the earth, so they're going to be important. First thing he says, no king of any neighboring clan would dare face me with troops. None had the power to intimidate me. Basically saying he's the most badass warrior in town, which is a pagan thought. Then he says, he never fomented quarrels and never swore to a lie, saying he never started fights, but he finished them, and he never lied. Sounds pretty Christian to me. And he says, the ruler of mankind need never blame me when the breath leaves my body for murder of kinsmen. Basically, he says, I've never killed a relative, which I think, pagan or Christian, that's something you never want to do. So his last thoughts are a pagan thought, a Christian thought, and then a pagan and Christian thought. And then the very, very last thing he says, yes, I want to examine the ancient gold, gaze my fill of those garnered jewels. My going will be easier for having seen the treasure, a less troubled letting go of the life and lordship I have maintained. So the last thing he wants to do on the earth is see this treasure. And your first reaction might be, wow, that's pretty pagan, because, the last thing you want to see in this world is all your material possessions. But he actually says, I want to see this treasure because I want to give it to my people, because I want it to help my people. He's not doing it for selfish glory, honor reasons. He's doing it for his people. He's doing it to be a good king. Not a bad king, a good king. So his last act, giving the treasure to the people, kind of Christian. Then you get his instructions for his burial, and we're going to talk about Beowulf's funeral. He leaves instructions that his body be put in a barrow, or his remains be put in a barrow. And they built a funeral pyre. His actual funeral is a funeral pyre. His body is going to be burned. That is a pagan burial ritual, as pagan as it could possibly be. Burning someone's body, pagan, 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 pagan. So it seems like, bottom of the ninth, end of the story, the way you leave the earth is that's a religious element to that, is pagan. But you find out heaven swallowed the smoke. Heaven swallowed the smoke. Heaven's Christian, very, very Christian. So Beowulf's funeral, his death, like the way his body leaves this world, and the last image we're left with in the poem, kind of sums up the poem perfectly as this mixture of pagan and Christian elements. The funeral itself, burning the body, pagan, but the smoke going up to heaven, it's almost like his soul or his spirit going up to heaven. That's Christian. And at the end of the day, that's the poem in a nutshell. It's a mixture of pagan and Christianity. Hope that makes sense. Hope you guys are enjoying or at least getting something out of these video talks that I'm doing. That's Beowulf. That's Beowulf fighting the dragon on the screen for you. That's why I have it there. So that's Beowulf. I think next time we're doing King Arthur stories, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.